Hello and welcome. Today I'll be presenting the Tactical EMS program, or otherwise known as a TEMS program, to be utilized for our agency for the safety of officers, more safety for those that are emergency responders for our team, that they would be more well trained and equipped going into these dangerous situations, and so that essentially there would be a better outcome for everybody involved. So on our second slide, we have a whole program introduction. This introduction talks about how since the inception of civilian EMS in the 70s, there's been a lot of development of different kinds of programs, this being one of them. The TEMS program, Tactical EMS, really didn't start coming about until the late 1980s, 1990s. And when the initial rollout happened, there wasn't a lot of standards on it. Different states did different things. They just know they needed a medical component, like in the field of battle. That way, if anything were to happen, you had point of care treatment right off the bat to essentially minimize any type of disability, permanent dismemberment, death. And through that, we find that it has coincided with, in the last handful of years, there's been a shift in more violent calls that first responders are responding to, such as like mass shootings. It can include barricaded subjects, maybe gas environments, but essentially we typically would send a ALS unit or a paramedic and EMT. They would respond, have no training, typical 911 stuff, and they would find themselves in a situation they weren't prepared for, weren't trained for. And it's not good for the officers because they may unknowingly interfere with what's going on tactically on scene and not even have an understanding of that they're even doing that. So this program is kind of designed to bridge the gap between the two, to provide training, not only increase training and level of service medically to the law enforcement partners, but it also allows us to essentially have EMS involvement, but not interfere with the ongoing tactical operations. So as far as objectives and goals for the program of why it's important, so this need for specialized TEMS unit and interface training, as I just mentioned, has become an increasing demand because of the increasing in mass shooting events and civil unrest that we've had in the last handful of years. The TEMS component increases safety to law enforcement, first responders, and of course the public in our communities as well. And this specialized training for TEMS providers will ultimately mitigate and decrease the likelihood of injury, permanent dismemberment, and disability or death. Here in the planning administrative considerations for the program, things we want to consider as we're planning so the operations are essentially overseen by what they call a tactical EMS program coordinator within the EMS agency, who is actually going to oversee that team, and essentially it's day-to-day functions, not so much the tactics in which they're put into. TEMS personnel are to be supervised and monitored by SWAT operators during all incidents for their safety. So essentially once they go live and they're on scene, they then are overseen by the tactical officers that are on scene running the incident anyway. As far as medical direction goes, that doesn't change. They still receive online medical direction from the EMS medical director, whether it's standing orders or they're going to call and get orders for something specific. CQI, of course, that's important. And kind of the CQI plan, the continuous quality improvement, it'll be overseen by the EMS clinical educators if they treat somebody, if they transport somebody, any type of care will get reviewed every single time. There is a care administered, even if it's an AMA against medical advice. They will essentially look through that, make sure that care was given appropriately, and then that will be taken care of on the medical side. When it comes to the tactical interface side, so whenever they do trainings and they're going to CQI the actual tactical interface training, that would actually be addressed by SWAT operators. So were our people where they needed to be? Did they move right? Was the movement of patients appropriate? Did they coordinate resources to whether it was a hot zone or warm zone? That will kind of be taken care of by their piece as to whether we operated with them versus against them, and in a way that was safe for everybody involved, of course. No more planning considerations that we want to take in consideration for the program was facility. Well, we can use our existing facilities already. No need for additional allocation of different type of a place to be. Asset allocation is kind of a bigger one, so that would need like a dedicated ambulance with a gurney, of course, cardiac monitor, ALS equipment, medications, and then the tactical side. So they'll need ballistic vests, helmets, gas masks, and uniforms that signify their TEMS personnel. For the staffing model, and what I'm looking at is we'd be at capacity. The TEMS team would be staffed with 6 paramedics and 3 EMTs, essentially allowing us to deploy multiple teams at any given time. Should there be some mass event that goes down, which has occurred in recent times, especially with a lot of civil unrest we saw around 2020, the election years with riots all over the country. And then some things to consider as we're staffing this group is some prerequisites, just some basic stuff, just to make sure that we don't have people brand new or that are struggling with any type of clinical or disciplinary actions. They need at least 2 years of experience in their current position, no remediations, no disciplinary actions, obviously a supervisor or manager recommendation into the program, and then being physically capable of passing the physical agility. Same thing that the SWAT officers would do, trying to get onto the team. Finances for the EMS agency, this would essentially be EMS, it would be funded by both EMS and the law enforcement teams we work with. That way, not one sole agency is responsible for the makeup, because it can be a very costly program, but for such a life-saving piece component that would rarely be used, hopefully, but when it does, it would drastically alter potential condition of somebody who was injured because of their timeliness. So of course, the EMS agency, they were going to be responsible. We would be responsible for staffing of our people, assets for the ambulance and ALS equipment and medical equipment, because we know all that best and we have that easier access to, and we know how to build that out. Law enforcement partners, they'd be responsible for putting on our training, paying for our tactical equipment, and then our uniforming. That way we get what we need, the appropriate uniforming and gear, because that's their area of expertise. That allows us to kind of share the cost and come together. Also, we might need to consider, because being private and public partnership, law enforcement being public, they would have access to public grants to where they could apply for public safety grants. Maybe it's for staffing, maybe it's to help us out, maybe it's for equipment, maybe it's for assets such as an ambulance. They can help pay for that and essentially lessen the burden of our financial cost. The other explanation of oversight, as we talked about, the TEMS coordinator who oversees the whole team will assign 1 paramedic and 1 EMT for every type of deployment, and they're going to respond via ambulance to the location. Upon arrival at the location, the SWAT personnel and law enforcement leadership will decide whether to deploy the paramedic into the armored vehicle, which would be in the hot and warm zone, or have the TEMS paramedic stage with the ambulance in close proximity to the target location, otherwise known as kind of warm but more so cold zone. Then the TEMS EMT will always remain with the ambulance. That way, obviously the ambulance moves because it won't be able to move without an ambulance, and then they'll be ready to respond when needed, whether the paramedic's there or not. The TEMS paramedic deployment plan and the ambulance staging location will always be at the discretion of the SWAT operators on scene, because they know where it is safe to be in relation to the target location. And TEMS personnel are not to interfere with any ongoing tactics or operations, and our goal is to be at the ready within close proximity to the target that is deemed safe by the experts. Training standards, essentially initial training, it's going to be 8 hours of training. They're going to have 40 hours of tactical interface training handled by the SWAT. They're going to have 40 hours of medical treatment skills and planning handled by our side of the house for people that are trained in TACMed. And then every essentially 2 years, when we recert our licensures and certifications, they will complete 24 hours of continuing education units, as we would normally do to keep our licensures up. That way they stay ready to go and knowledgeable on the topics themselves. So as far as an evaluation go, we would typically, most commonly, anytime we deploy, we're going to evaluate that. And what I have in slide 9, it goes over response, times, and that's simply like a yes or a no, not so much metrics of the time, but just did we meet the goal of what we were set out to do? Did we provide any care? Did we participate in medical planning? Did we have participation in post-analysis, incident analysis, and debriefing? And then did we make ourselves at the ready moving forward? And then of course that would trigger anything. Medical treatment would go straight to CQI at that point. And then essentially explaining the evaluation. The goals of the deployment evaluation are to ensure our personnel respond to the incident in a timely manner, they arrive at the requested location prepared to go, they assist in medical operational planning, they operate safely in a potential hazardous setting, and they maintain positive relationships and partnerships with our law enforcement partners. Further explanation, the TEMS program would also have training evaluations reviewed by SWAT, as I mentioned earlier, and clinical care evaluations, which are reviewed by CES. The one that I talked about, the deployment, is more of an operational one that the TEMS program coordinator would look at every single time they're deployed. And then these evaluations would also be focused around, these are focused around quantitative data collection and evaluation, but yearly reporting is something we'd want to look at more of a qualitative data collection and evaluation, because that's where we're going to look into the specific response time metrics, average response times. We're going to look into what's considered to be like how many deployments in a year, how many times did we do training, how many times did we transport, how many times did we do AMA, how many times did we innovate, how many times did we start an IV. We're going to look at all those things and get percentages and then success rates and more qualitative data than what we do quantitatively every time they respond to something. So in summary, the TEMS program is a proven necessity in modern times to assist law enforcement in hazardous situations. We want to make sure that we have appropriately trained medical personnel that are deployed into these situations that do not interfere with ongoing tactical situations and care for those who become injured during these incidents, and essentially are experts in what they do. We don't just want anyone off the street just because they're a paramedic being sent into a situation that they have no idea how to operate, they have no idea how to hold themselves, they don't even know where to stand and be safe. And this is where this team would prove valuable to everybody involved. And then save lives, of course. And then all trainings will be interfaced with law enforcement and personnel to maximize preparedness, interoperability amongst all personnel. And lastly, TEMS program oversight will be shared between EMS and SWAT to ensure safety and seamless operation, but primarily responsible will be the tactical EMS coordinator, who's going to oversee the majority of the operations of the TEMS program. Our evaluative process will be quantitative in nature to measure the effectiveness of the operation, but qualitative data will also be collected yearly to evaluate numerical data such as response times, participation, etc. And then to kind of cap it off, the goal of the team is to ultimately reduce injury, dismemberment, permanent disability, and or death of those operating in the unique and specialized SWAT environment. That includes suspects, that includes law enforcement, that includes medical personnel, includes community members if there's a hostage situation or the neighbor next door gets hurt. This team is specialized to deploy into some of the worst situations, but being highly trained and familiar and ready to respond at any moment's notice. Thank you much for your time, and I hope you consider the proposal of this safety program to enhance EMS services to the community and our law enforcement partners.